I have always been the one responsible, reliable, the one you can rely on in difficult times and who does not expect praise for the commitments she has made. My name is Sylvia, I am 37 years old, and I work as a senior marketing director at one of the large technology companies, where every day is scheduled literally down to the minute, and every morning begins with email, ends with meetings, and where every promotion, every salary increase is given later and with sleepless nights. My job is certainly good, prestigious, and decently paid, but to reach this position, I had to go through a path in comparison to which climbing a mountain will seem like a Sunday stroll, endless overtime, postponed vacations, a choice between career and personal life, in which career growth always won. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. Unlike my younger brother and sister, whose lives seem to me to drift slowly, unburdened by debt, plans for the future, and certainly not a sense of responsibility for their parents, I always took my successes for granted rather than as a personal victory, so when my parents called and invited me to a family dinner, I, busy with yet another project, did not suspect anything special. We did not meet very often, but enough to maintain the illusion of closeness. They bought their house about 10 years ago, taking out a mortgage that they still repay regularly. The house was in one of the quiet suburbs, a place not remarkable, but cozy, with a well-kept lawn and a porch where my mother grew geraniums. I arrived to see them that evening not in my own car, mine was being repaired, as often happens with those who live alone and are forced to save up for every little thing, but in an old, battered Honda belonging to my brother Diego, who either forgot or did not want to take it. Bianca's glossy Mazda was parked at the side of the road, big, like her taste in things, always a little on display. The whole family was gathered, a thought that made something unpleasant prick inside me. I grabbed the bottle of red wine I had brought with me and entered the house, where my mother immediately met me on the threshold. Her embrace was so strong, as if she was holding on to me like a last support. "Sylvia, you finally came," she said with a trembling smile and looked at me with some kind of persistent sadness hiding behind the shadow of fatigue under her eyes. "Are you okay, Mom?" I asked, holding out the bottle. "We'll talk about that later at dinner," she answered and waved her hand towards the living room. "Your dad is with Diego and Bianca." I walked in to where my father was sitting in his usual chair, where he read the newspaper every weekend morning like clockwork. Only now he looked like someone had pressed the speed-up aging button. His back was bent, his hair thinned, and his face had acquired some kind of sickly transparency. "Hi, Dad," I said and leaned over to kiss him on the cheek. "How are you?" "It was better," he smiled weakly, "but we'll have time to talk about everything later." "Are you sick?" Anxiety pricked my chest, as it always did when his health was discussed. No, he shook his head, "Not about that. We'll tell you at dinner." I glanced at the couch where my brother and sister were sitting. Diego was, as usual, engrossed in his phone, his fingers sliding across the screen as if he were trying to find meaning in life. "Hey, guys," I said, trying to inject a warmth into my voice that I didn't feel. "Hey, sis," he said, not even looking in my direction. He was 28, but sometimes he seemed like a teenager who never wanted to grow up, constantly bartending to support himself with parties, beer, and the latest girl of the week. Bianca looked up at me, nodded, and went back to her Instagram. "Nice outfit." "Target," she said with that familiar edge of sarcasm that turned any compliment into a jab. Mom called us into the dining room, and we sat down as if it were a ritual that kept the family together. Mom and Dad were at the ends of the table. I was next to Mom, Diego, and Bianca were opposite each other. There was a stew on the table, my favorite dish since childhood, which Mom only cooked for special occasions, and at that moment I felt something inside me tighten. Something was clearly wrong. During the meal, the conversation did not flow. We chatted about trivialities, as if we were afraid to touch the real thing, and only when the plates were full and the forks began to scratch the porcelain, did Dad clear his throat and say with that quiet seriousness that made everything inside go cold, "Children, Mom and I need to talk to you." Mom took his hand, as if she needed more than just moral support. "We've been having some financial difficulties," she said, her voice breaking. "What difficulties?" I asked, putting my fork down. Dad sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I lost my job last month, layoffs, and Mom, the doctor says she needs to cut back on her hours, blood pressure, fatigue, all that. So what now? Diego muttered, his mouth full. That means we'll have a hard time paying the mortgage, and the utilities, and everything. There was a silence, heavy, as if the air in the room had suddenly become thicker. Then everyone's eyes slowly turned to me, and I felt an icy current run between my shoulder blades. It's embarrassing to ask, Mom began, tears glinting in her eyes, but we are a family. I already help, I said carefully, trying to remain calm, money for food, the refrigerator, renovating the bathroom. I turned to Diego and Bianca. And I helped you both, too, with the rent, when you couldn't cope. They exchanged glances, and Bianca, crossing her arms, leaned forward. Yes, but, Sylvia, you earn much more than all of us. And we weren't talking about something ephemeral, not about a random whim or a temporary need that could be ignored, but about our parents, the people who gave us life, raised us, led us through childhood and adolescence with that patience and warmth that I seem to have begun to especially appreciate only now, when I increasingly caught their glances, full of anxiety and apologetic gratitude. You got a big promotion, Diego said, not even looking up from the phone, as if the phrase had been on the tip of his tongue for a long time and was just waiting for the right moment to say it. You don't need all that money, he added with the same ease with which he had previously asked me for a couple hundred for rent, as if the money were not the result of my efforts, but some inexhaustible source that could be accessed at any moment. I sat at the table, stunned by their directness and impudence, only one thought spinning in my head. So you want me to just take over their mortgage? And what, I wonder, are you two doing? Dad, unable to withstand my gaze, looked down at his plate, as if he could find a way out of the situation between the pieces of stew and gravy. We're not asking forever, dear, he said quietly, carefully, as if hoping that the words spoken would somehow anger me less. Mum added, we would never have asked if we hadn't been desperate, we thought we could handle it ourselves, but... I slowly looked at the faces of everyone at that table, my brothers and sister, whom I had repeatedly bailed out, supporting them financially when they had tripped up over their own carelessness, and my parents, whom I still loved despite everything. I knew I should say no, that I should maintain the boundaries that had long since been erased, but instead I heard my own voice say, okay, I'll help. The relief with which those words were received literally dissipated the tension in the room, as if someone had thrown open the windows and let in fresh air. Mom's eyes immediately filled with light, and she squeezed my hand across the table and whispered, I knew we could count on you, Sylvia, you've always been our rock. Dad sat up straight in his chair and nodded, without saying a word, but that nod contained everything: gratitude, weariness, and hope. After that, the conversation seemed to change a record. Now everything was easy and relaxed. Dad began to joke. Bianca enthusiastically told how some celebrity accidentally dropped by her salon, and Diego, pleased, described the details of his new novel, accompanying the story with smirks and hints, but I barely heard them. I mentally ran my eyes over the numbers in my budget, noting how far away from me my dream was: my own house, with a garden and trees, with quiet evenings and a place that would be only mine. When I returned home that night, the apartment greeted me with silence and the familiar semi-darkness, and before I took off my shoes, I was already opening the banking app on my phone, setting up an automatic monthly payment on my parents' mortgage. Family first, I reminded myself, even if you are taken for granted. The weeks that followed that fateful dinner began to destroy my old routine. What had started as a single line item in the budget turned into an endless stream of requests, almost demands, coming not only from my parents but also from Bianca and Diego, as if I had become not their sister but a living bank with an unlimited overdraft. Mom needed money for groceries, although I had just recently transferred her enough for a month's purchase. Dad called with the news that the car had broken down, then the bill for the water heater arrived, then the property tax arrived. Each time, almost without thinking, I opened the app and sent the money, convincing myself that all this was temporary, that soon Dad would get a new job, Mom would get better and be able to return to her usual rhythm, and everything would get better. But the temporary became permanent. The months passed, each bringing its own unexpected expenses, and one early spring morning, just as the sun was beginning to break through my kitchen blinds, my phone vibrated. A message from Bianca: need $2,000 for a cosmetology certificate. Without it, they won't hire me. Can you help? I stared at the screen, mentally calculating. This month alone, I had already wired my parents $1,200 for the mortgage, another $450 for utilities, and last week I had given Diego $800 for a transmission repair on his car. My savings were dwindling like water in a leaky vessel, and I felt like I was losing ground, but instead of refusing, I simply wrote, "I'll wire it today." Bianca responded almost immediately, "You're the best, I'll pay you back someday." We both knew that wouldn't happen. I opened my banking app, transferred the money, and opened my budget spreadsheet. The numbers were as grim as the beginning of a storm. The dream of a home I had nurtured for years increasingly felt like a mirage, eluding me with every step. The money I had saved with such care and discipline was now a pool, a family insurance fund in which I played the role of insurer, sponsor, and taxpayer. Family first, I reminded myself again, even if they didn't notice, didn't appreciate, and maybe didn't even respect it. My birthday came at the end of April, and I was 37. I didn't have big plans, didn't expect toasts or celebratory speeches. I just wanted a quiet evening, eating my favorite takeout and drinking a glass of good wine in my apartment. I invited my family, not expecting much, but still hoping for some kind of attention. Mom and Dad showed up first, empty-handed. "Sorry, honey," Mom said, kissing my cheek. "No present this year, you know how it is, we don't want to give you something cheap." I swallowed my disappointment. "No problem, I'm just glad you came." Dad patted me on the shoulder and walked past me into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and got a beer without asking. About 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang again. A strange woman was standing in front of me, smiling tightly, as if she felt like she was intruding on someone else's space. "Happy birthday, sis," Diego said, appearing behind her, and handed me a small package wrapped in a sheet of newspaper. "This is Chiarina." The woman nodded and waved. "You have a nice place," she said, quickly looking around my apartment. I unwrapped the gift, a keychain with a plastic cupcake. The price tag was on the side, $4.99. "Thank you," I said, forcing a smile that, despite my best efforts, was forced, as if I were playing the role of a hostess who was obligated to welcome any kind of attention, even if it was a plastic cupcake for $4.99. "Do you have anything to eat?" Diego asked. Already heading into my kitchen with the ease of a man who feels he can do anything in a house. "We're starving," he added, looking around without even waiting for an invitation. I stood in the doorway, watching him fill our plates with the pasta I'd ordered especially for the evening, feeling that at least once a year I would have an excuse not to think about cooking. He served it generously, not one at a time, but 3 at a time, even collecting the leftovers in a separate container, as if it was a given that they could take it with them. "We have to go," he announced, looking at his watch, as if the whole evening had been a stopover between more important matters. "Siren's friend is having an issue. Can we take this?" He already had the plastic container in his hands, not waiting for an answer. Before I could open my mouth, they were already heading for the door. "Thanks for the food," he called over his shoulder, and within seconds the apartment was quiet again. I returned to the living room, where my parents were sitting. They hadn't brought a gift, but they had brought with them the baggage of their worries and complaints, wrapped in the same wrapping they had been doing lately, reminders of debt, of family, of how hard their life was. Mom was telling me that the insurance had gone up again, and Dad was mentioning some new fees. Then Mom added with feigned ease, "By the way, we could use a new washing machine. The old one is making that awful squeak." Again, I nodded without interrupting, letting their words fall on me like raindrops from which I didn't even try to hide. I had already given more to their needs this month than I had planned, but it seemed there were no limits. When they left and the door closed behind them, I sat down on the sofa, surrounded by empty food containers, dirty glasses, and some kind of deep inner fatigue. That's how my birthday turned out, an evening in which only candles remained of the celebration, one of which remained unlit. 2 more months passed, during which my bank account continued to rapidly decrease, and the resentment inside grew, straightening my shoulders and winning more and more space in my heart. I didn't tell anyone about it, didn't complain, but every new request, every call or message with the text "could you please" brought me closer to the edge that I had outlined for myself, the edge of patience, loyalty, self-sacrifice. And then the announcement came. Mom called one evening and, trying to sound cheerful, as if in passing, said, "You know, This year we are celebrating an anniversary, 40 years. We thought that we could finally celebrate it properly, rent a beautiful place, invite relatives, organize catering, something special. We only need $5,000. I froze with the phone in my hand, everything in me screamed no. I should have said no. But my mother kept talking, and her voice shook with the same note that had been in her during that family dinner, when she had asked me for help. We never really celebrated anniversaries, you know? There's never time, always kids, work, expenses. I gave in, again. The day of the party arrived, and it was perfect, a venue in the center of town, spacious, elegant, with gold garlands, candles, round tables covered with white tablecloths, with a buffet where food was served by waiters in uniform. I saw familiar faces from the past, aunts, uncles, cousins, neighbors long gone from our lives, and friends I hadn't seen since high school. Everyone was dressed up, smiling, holding glasses of champagne, offering compliments and congratulations. I stood among them, answering the standard questions. How are you? Still working at the same company? No? Well, I never. And your personal life? No? Well, there's still time. When it was time for speeches, everyone gathered around the stage, decorated with flowers and family photos. Aunt Linda was the first to step forward, speaking touchingly about love and devotion. She was followed by a family friend, who shared a funny story from his parents' youth. Then it was the turn of us, the kids. Diego stepped forward with a glass of champagne and gave an inspired speech about how our parents were always there for him, how they supported his dreams, how they believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. Bianca spoke next, and as soon as she began to speak, she burst into tears, remembering how her mother sat by her bed at night, how her father taught her to draw, how they sacrificed everything for her. When it was my turn, I stood up, went to the microphone and, gathering all my will, gave a short, polite speech. 40 years together is a feat. You deserve happiness, peace, and many more years together. Congratulations. They nodded, smiled, thanked, and immediately turned to Diego and Bianca, turning their attention to them again, as if I had disappeared from their field of vision again, turning into someone whose presence was not so important. During their response, the parents talked about how proud they were of their children. They talked at length and with passion about Diego's enterprise, his courage, his open heart and free spirit. Then they moved on to Bianca about her talent, how she is not afraid to take risks, how she strives for creativity. I was mentioned once, and Sylvia was always so responsible. I forced a smile, looking at my hands, clutching a glass of wine. I paid for the entire evening, from the champagne to the tablecloths, and was barely remembered. As dessert was being served, my phone rang. It was my boss. There had been problems with the presentation, the client was waiting, and urgent intervention was required. I excused myself and went out to answer it. While talking, I slowly walked down the hallway to the exit, and when I finished the conversation, I paused at the mirror in the alcove to tidy myself up. At that moment, I heard voices. It was my mother and Aunt Linda. I froze, still holding on to the frame of the mirror. You hardly mentioned Sylvia in your speech, Aunt Linda said, and there was genuine surprise in her voice. Mama laughed softly, almost whispering, as if sharing a small secret. Well, between you and me, Sylvia is just a wallet for us now. She always gives us money when we ask. The words fell on me like a powerful blow, from which you catch your breath and involuntarily retreat, without even realizing where exactly. I pressed myself against the cool wall of the hallway, pressing myself into it, as if trying to become invisible, as if its surface could shelter me from reality, from these alien, treacherous voices, one of which belonged to my mother, the woman I continued to justify, even when she was no longer a support for me. If she hadn't helped with the mortgage and everything, my mother continued, her voice level, the same casual intonation with which one discusses discounts at a store, we probably wouldn't even be talking. I heard her sigh, and then, almost mockingly, she added, she was always difficult, not like Diego and Bianca. It must be hard, Aunt Linda said sympathetically, and there was not just pity in her voice but a strange tinge of understanding, as if she knew what it was like to live with such disappointment in your own child. You have to pretend to care about a child you don't love. The words struck like a hammer blow to the inner pillars, to those thin bridges of faith and hope that I was still trying to hold on to despite everything that was happening. I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. and in my head I heard the words, "Sylvia is just a wallet to us now." My own mother, the person for whom I had sacrificed my dreams, my time, my money, had just admitted that she didn't love me, that she only hung around for my credit card, my salary, my predictable reliability, everything I had ever believed in, everything I had ever thought was immutable, the love of family, its support, even in its most truncated forms, was crumbling before my eyes. And I couldn't even scream. "Have you and Robert updated your wills lately?" Aunt Linda asked casually, as if continuing a conversation over coffee. "I did it last year," Mom answered easily. "The house and everything will be divided between Diego and Bianca. Sylvia is not on the list." I pressed my hand to my lips, trying to hold back the sigh that rose in my throat, a mingling of humiliation, bitterness, and, worst of all, the realization of the futility of everything I had done for them. The house I had paid the mortgage on, renovated, maintained, so that my parents had a roof over their heads, would never be even partially mine. They had not just used my help, they had excluded me from their lives, even in the future. I heard them heading back to the hall, and before they had time to notice me, I slipped into the nearest restroom and locked myself in a stall, feeling how the air seemed to thicken, become viscous and heavy. My reflection in the mirror, when I finally emerged, looked at me with familiar confidence, the same eyes, the same lips, the same hairdo, as if nothing had changed, but I knew, everything had changed. I was different. I walked back to the party like a ghost, quietly, through the laughing crowd, where no eyes lingered on me, no hands reached out to greet me. I picked up my jacket without a word and walked out the door. No one noticed, no one called, no one asked where I was. I went home, in silence, replaying what I had heard in my head like an old tape, where every sound hurts again and again. At home, without taking off my coat, I poured myself a large glass of wine, sat down at my laptop, and opened my banking app. With the dispassionate detachment of a surgeon before an operation, I scrolled through the list of transfers, transactions, payments, and for the first time in all this time, I put it all together: the mortgage, the utilities, the loans for Diego, the certificate for Bianca, the anniversary party, almost $30,000, in a few months, 30,000, erased from my future, invested in people for whom I am just a convenient function. With a decisive, almost predatory movement, I cancelled the planned mortgage payment, I closed the laptop, I finished my wine, and for the first time in a long time, I went to bed without checking my phone, without worrying, without running through the scenarios of the next family crisis in my head. I slept, really. A week came, strangely empty, filled with an unusual calm. Not a single call from my parents, not a single message from my brothers or sister, complete silence. No one asked where I was, no one noticed that I was gone, they didn't care. Exactly 7 days after the anniversary, the phone rang. Mom's name was on the screen. I answered. "Sylvia," her voice was tense, almost panicked. "The bank just called, they said the mortgage payment didn't go through. You probably forgot to send it?" "No," I said, calmly, without unnecessary emotion. "Hi, no, how are you?" "Not your style, straight to the point, huh?" "What do you mean?" Her voice was shaking. "You forgot?" "I didn't forget, I cancelled the payment," I said clearly, each word like a hammer on glass. There was silence, so thick I could hear myself breathing. Then, "What do you mean, cancelled? Why did you do that?" "I'm not paying your mortgage anymore, Mom, I'm not giving you any money anymore." Her voice shot up. "Are you crazy? What happened to you? I heard you at the party. You told Aunt Linda that I was just a wallet to you, that you didn't love me, that if it weren't for the money, we wouldn't even be talking." Mom stuttered. "You got it all wrong, I didn't mean to. And I heard the will, too, everything for Diego and Bianca, nothing for me, although I paid for your house." There was a short pause, and her tone changed. Panic gave way to condescension. "You're exaggerating, family helps family, that's what we do." "No," I answered firmly, "that's what I did, only me, not Diego, not Bianca, not you and Dad, no one else helped, I'm alone, and now, that's enough." I hung up and turned off the phone. When I turned it on a few hours later, the screen was filled with notifications, dozens of missed calls, messages from everyone: Mom, Dad, Bianca, Diego. Suddenly, they all really wanted to talk to me. I opened a couple of the messages. Almost all of them were the same: you're selfish, you're overdoing it, you have money, why not help? You have to. I blocked their numbers. It was easier than I expected, as if the moment my finger touched the screen and the string of numbers disappeared from the phone's memory. A painful thorn had been torn out of me, not completely, with jagged marks, but still torn out. For 3 blessed days I lived in silence, in a calm that felt almost like luxury. No vibrating phone in the middle of the night, no letters with requests, no voices that reached out to me through the network, demanding, persuading, accusing. I breathed more evenly, slept more soundly, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged to myself. But Saturday morning upset this fragile balance. A sharp knock on the door woke me up. The awakening was sharp, like an electric shock. Still sleepy, I went to the door, looked through the peephole, and froze. There they were, all 4 of them, Mom with a tight smile and a guilty look, Dad with his shoulders slumped and his jaw set, Diego with an irritated expression, and Bianca leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. They looked like people who had come not to apologize, but to make demands. "Sylvia, we know you're in there," Dad called, his voice tired but still pressing. "Open up, we need to talk." I took a step back, but my voice was firm. "I have nothing to say to any of you. Please leave." Mom began to wail, her voice breaking, hoarse with desperation. "We had to borrow money to make the monthly payment. We could lose the house." Dad added, almost whispering, "My health is bad. Do you want us to be homeless?" I stood still, my heart pounding dull and heavy, but my mind as cold as glass. "Why aren't Diego and Bianca helping?" I asked, and there was everything in that question: weariness, hurt, the logic they'd ignored for years. "After all, they're going to get the house in your will. How can you be so selfish?" Bianca screamed, stepping forward, her voice harsh, almost hysterical. "You're just a bitter old maid with nowhere to spend her money anyway." The words hurt, not because I believed them, but because they confirmed that everything I thought, everything I feared, was true. I was just a checkbook to them, a source, a function. "Leave now, or I'll call the police," I said quietly but clearly, the words ringing in the air like a high note. "If you don't leave in the next 60 seconds, I'm calling 911. I heard someone mutter a curse, then silence, followed by footsteps retreating. From the window, I watched them silently get into my father's old car and drive away without a backward glance. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. The phone rang again, from unfamiliar numbers. Other relatives were calling: aunts, uncles, cousins, even distant ones, people I hadn't spoken to in years, all with the same message, repeated like a mantra: "Family is the most important thing, you have to help your parents. How could you be so cruel?" I stopped answering. I blocked my email, I deleted my social media accounts, I built myself a fortress of silence, and to my surprise, this fortress held. Little by little, the siege died down, the whispers died down. I heard from mutual friends that Diego and Bianca had moved back in with their parents. They were helping with the mortgage. Although I suspected that help meant more presents than money, their lives had changed. Bianca stopped posting photos from expensive boutiques. Diego no longer posted selfies from their latest get-together. Now they had only themselves to rely on. Meanwhile, I was rebuilding my finances. My bank account was growing slowly but surely. I opened the dream sheet again, the one where I wrote down the amounts needed for a down payment, for registration, for repairs, and, to my surprise, saw that this dream was becoming more real every day. I started looking at real estate ads again, signed up for showings, went from house to house, touched the walls, looked at the light from the windows for the future. One evening, while scrolling through photos of houses, I received a message from an unknown number: "Mom, please call me, we need to talk, we miss you." I closed the message, blocked the number and went back to looking at kitchens and gardens, to plans that had no place for those who saw me only as a source of income. 3 months passed without contact with my family. For the first time in many years, I felt myself coming back to me, the voices that were not mine silencing, the obligations that were imposed on me and that I had accepted as a debt. I went to therapy. I was scared to admit that I was not loved, scared to realize that I had been buying love all my life. My therapist helped me put it all into perspective. I hoped that if I gave them enough attention, money, time, they would finally say that they were proud of me. But you couldn't buy their recognition with that currency. It wasn't for sale. In the 4th month, I made up my mind. I put my apartment up for sale. It went quickly. even faster than I expected, and brought in a decent amount. With my savings added, I made a serious offer on a house I had been eyeing for a long time, small but bright, with high ceilings, a cozy backyard entwined with greenery, and a quiet neighborhood where birds sang in the mornings instead of people screaming. It was not the mansion of my dreams. This was better, this was my choice, my work, my freedom. The next morning, after my offer was accepted, the phone rang, again an unknown number. I, not knowing why, answered. Sylvia, my father's voice, hoarse, quiet, much quieter than I remembered. Please don't hang up. What do you want, Dad? I asked, trying to keep an even, neutral tone, not letting my voice waver even on half a syllable, because I knew that the slightest crack could give way to all those feelings that I had trained with such difficulty not to go beyond the heart. We're in a really tough spot, he said after a moment, his voice low and taut, like a wire about to snap. The bank is threatening to foreclose on the house. Your mother and I have tried to hold on. Diego and Bianca are trying, but they can't cover all the expenses. I'm sorry to hear that, I said calmly, and despite the cringing inside me, I meant it, because despite everything that had happened, I didn't want them to suffer. I just couldn't go on being what they were used to seeing me as, a life preserver to inflate when you were drowning and then throw back in the closet. But there's nothing more I can do. There was silence, and in it I could feel him searching for words, his head probably running through possible arguments, pressures, levers. We made a mistake, he finally said. Your mother and I talked, we changed the will. Now the house will be divided 3 ways, equal shares for all our children. There it was, not an apology, not an attempt at understanding, not a gesture of love, but a calculated deal, designed to soften me, to lure me back into the role of sponsor, a share of the house that could be taken away at any moment for debts, as compensation for everything they had said, everything they had done, for all the years when I was nothing more than a bank app with a transfer button for them. Dad, I said quietly, almost a whisper, but there was a power in my words, garnered from months of silence. It's not about the will, it's not about the money, it's about how you perceived me, about how Mom said she didn't even love me, that I was just a wallet to you. He mumbled something, trying to argue. She was upset that day. She didn't mean it that way, but I knew she did. It was perfectly clear, I replied, and neither of you apologized. You're not calling because you understood, you're calling because you need money again. The silence on the other end of the line confirmed my point. I have to go, Dad, I said. I just bought a house, my house. I hope things work out for you. And without waiting for an answer, I ended the call and immediately blocked the number. The attempts to reach me didn't stop, on the contrary, they became more desperate, more intrusive. Messages came through mutual friends, through former colleagues, even one of my old neighbors once left a note under the door, and again, it all came down to the same thing. What do they need? What do they want? How can I give it to them? Not once, not a single word of remorse, not a single acknowledgement of the pain they had caused, not a single attempt to make amends, only requests, only expectations. Through mutual friends, I learned that to avoid foreclosure on their house, they had taken out a second mortgage. Diego had finally gotten a job at a warehouse, officially, full-time. Bianca had quit cosmetology and taken a job as an administrator at a clinic. My parents had sold their second car, and were cutting back on everything, food, clothes, entertainment. They had begun to live the way many people do who cannot afford recklessness. And I felt a strange, frightening, but somehow liberating mix of feelings. Sadness, because, despite everything, these were my parents. Satisfaction, because they were finally starting to grow up. Guilt, because I could have helped, but chose not to. Relief, because I was no longer under their control. But most of all, I felt proud. I had stood my ground. I had not allowed myself to be used again. 6 months later, I moved into my own house. It wasn't fancy, but it was everything I'd dreamed of. Bright, clean, cozy, in a neighborhood where kids played on the sidewalks, where neighbors said hello to each other, where the birds chirped in the mornings instead of the hum of complaints. Every square inch was mine, bought honestly, with difficulty, but without shame. I painted the walls in soft, warm colors, chose the furniture to my taste, arranged books and candles, and finally planted flowers in the front garden, the very patch of land I'd dreamed of all my childhood. And as I unpacked the boxes in my new bedroom, I suddenly realized I was home, for the first time, for real. A few days later, the doorbell rang. I opened it and there stood a courier with a large, thick envelope. Inside was an elegant invitation to my cousin Emma's wedding and a short note in her hand. "I know things are not going well at the family right now, but I'd really like you to come, no pressure." Emma had always been special, quiet, sensitive. She never took sides, never judged, never got involved in other people's conflicts. I called her that evening. "Thanks for the invitation," I said, leaning against the kitchen counter, feeling emotions pricking my ribs, "but I'm not sure it's a good idea. Will my parents be there?" "They will be," she answered honestly, "but it's my day, and I want you to come. I'll sit you away from them. If anyone tries to corner you, my fiancé's brothers will take them out. Both are former football players," she added with a laugh. I thought about it. Maybe it was time to go back, not to them, but to myself, to my family, to those who were always there for me, but never asked for anything in return. "I'll be there," I said, and I did go. The wedding was beautiful, a room filled with light, fresh flowers, the clinking of glasses, laughter, dancing. True to her word, Emma sat me at a table with friends from school, people I hadn't seen in a long time but who looked at me as if I had always belonged. Mom and Dad were in the room. I caught a glimpse of them. They looked different, older, more reserved. Diego stood in a suit, a little too big, with a button undone on the collar. Bianca, without her usual designer bags and jewelry, with a simple hairdo, and, surprisingly, a calm face. During the reception, when the music in the hall grew louder and the conversations at the tables filled with laughter and the clink of glasses, I suddenly felt that I needed a little silence, air, space, and, having gone outside to take a break from the crowd for a moment, I found myself face to face with my mother, standing at the side entrance with a plastic cup of water in her hands, as if she, too, were looking for a way to escape, at least a little, from the captivity of memories that had befallen us all that evening. "Sylvia," she said with noticeable surprise, as if she had not expected me to dare to come out of the shadow of my self-imposed exile, and her face reflected a mixture of relief, caution, and barely noticeable anxiety. "You look well, thank you," I said, trying not to look for hidden meaning in her words, simply accepting them as a fact. "You too." There was a silence, thick as the evening air, filled with things we hadn't dared say. "I heard you bought a house," she said finally, and I caught the same timid curiosity in her voice that I had once used when I asked her about something important. "Yes," I nodded. "I sold my apartment and bought a nice place with a backyard. It's not very big, but it's perfect for me. Quiet, green, space." My mother nodded, her gaze sliding down to her hands, as if searching for answers in them that she couldn't find in words. "Things are going better for us now," she said, trying to sound calm. "Diego got a promotion, he has a steady income, and Bianca is going back to school. Something practical this time, not fashion or makeup." "I'm glad," I said, and it was the truth, without offense or sarcasm. "We miss you," she added quietly, and her voice was fragile, almost weightless, like paper held in the wind. I looked at her, really looked at her, not through the lens of pain or old reproaches, but as a person who had made mistakes, who was tired, who was losing power, but who still hoped to get something back, even if not everything. And in that moment, I did not see before me the manipulative woman who had once called me a wallet without hesitation, only a mother, older, confused, who had made a terrible choice and was now living with its consequences. "I miss who I thought you all were," I admitted, and there was so much truth in those words that I suddenly felt better. "But I don't miss being used." She flinched, but to my surprise I saw that she was not going to argue, was not making excuses, was not retreating into her usual patterns. She was simply standing, listening, accepting as best she could. I was about to go back inside when she called out to me, "Will you ever forgive us?" I froze, allowing myself a few seconds to think, feeling a light wind of doubt rising inside, but it did not knock me off my feet. It was just there. "Maybe someday," I answered without turning around, "but not today." And, returning to the hall, to the light, to the music, to the people who were waiting for me not because I owed them something, but simply because I am me, I suddenly felt a lightness and freedom that I had never known before. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need to buy their love. I had enough of myself and the life I had built on my own terms, with pain, but also with dignity, and that, I realized, was what was worth celebrating. Leave a comment on what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.